Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Spend enough time around gun shops in 2026 and you're guaranteed to hear the same argument on repeat. One shooter is passionately defending the blistering speed of the .357 Magnum. Another is standing firm behind the heavyweight authority of the .45 ACP. But here's the hard truth. Most people shopping for a revolver completely overlook. They're judging both cartridges using data and assumptions pulled almost entirely from semi-auto testing. What they're missing is the mechanical reality of how these rounds actually function inside a wheel gun. On one side, you've got a high-performance racehorse that needs room to stretch its legs. On the other, you've got a low-pressure workhorse that depends on specialized hardware just to operate properly. Today, we're cutting through the gun counter mythology. We're diving into cartridge design, mechanical operation, terminal performance, and what really matters when things go bad and your life depends on the gun in your hand. Cartridge architecture. Let's start at the foundation by looking at the cartridge cases themselves. To understand this properly, we need to go all the way back to the era of the 1911. The .357 Magnum was purpose-built for revolvers. Right at the base, you'll find a pronounced rim. That rim allows the cartridge to headspace perfectly against the rear of the cylinder. When you're under stress and slam that ejector rod, the extractor star grabs those rims and clears the empty cases with outstanding reliability. The .45 ACP comes from a completely different lineage. It's a rimless cartridge that was designed specifically for John Browning's 1911 pistol. If you want to use that cartridge in a revolver, moon clips become part of the equation. These thin pieces of spring steel lock into the extractor grooves of the cases and allow the revolver to function properly. Here, in 2026, mention moon clips online and you'll start an argument instantly. Their supporters point out that they provide the fastest reloads a revolver can offer. All 6 rounds enter the cylinder together as a single unit, and all 6 empties come out the same way. There's no fumbling with individual cartridges while adrenaline is flooding your system. But there's a trade-off. That thin piece of metal becomes a potential failure point. If a moon clip gets bent in your pocket, range bag, or vehicle, the cylinder can bind up completely. Suddenly, your defensive firearm has become a very expensive paperweight. One of the biggest mistakes people make is treating a .45 ACP revolver like a simple grab and go gun. In reality, it relies heavily on those clips. Meanwhile, a dedicated .357 Magnum revolver remains completely self-contained. You can load it from a speed loader, loose rounds, or whatever ammunition source is available. Lose the moon clips on your .45 ACP revolver, and you'll be digging empty cases out manually, potentially with a pocket knife. Next up is what I like to call the engine room of the discussion: chamber pressure and long-term wear. The .357 Magnum operates like a pressure vessel. We're talking about chamber pressures hovering around 35,000 psi. Every trigger press sends a significant shock through the firearm. The forcing cone takes abuse, the frame absorbs punishment, and the crane experiences ongoing stress. The .45 ACP lives in a completely different world. It runs at a much more relaxed 21,000 psi. Instead of relying on pressure, it depends on launching a large, heavy projectile at moderate velocity. Because of that, it's exceptionally easy on the gun itself. A quality .45 ACP revolver, built on a strong frame, can realistically serve multiple generations of shooters. Tens of thousands of rounds can pass through the gun while maintaining excellent lockup and structural integrity. The reduced operating pressure minimizes fatigue on the steel, and just as importantly, on the shooter. Many people assume higher pressure automatically equals better defensive effectiveness. In reality, lower pressure cartridges often encourage more frequent training because they're easier on both the firearm and the person firing it. Consistent practice with a gun that doesn't beat you up is a huge advantage. Now let's move into the ballistic side of the discussion by comparing velocity against projectile weight. The .357 Magnum earned its reputation through speed. A classic 125 grain projectile can leave the muzzle at roughly 1,450 feet per second. At those velocities, the round creates a significant temporary cavity and delivers the kind of hydrostatic shock that made it famous in law enforcement circles. But the cartridge depends heavily on velocity to make that happen. The .45 ACP takes the opposite approach. It doesn't care about speed nearly as much. Instead, it relies on sheer mass and frontal diameter. A typical 230-grain projectile weighs almost twice as much as the classic Magnum load and travels at roughly 850 feet per second. Rather than creating dramatic temporary cavities, it delivers momentum and a large permanent wound channel. The .45 ACP doesn't require expansion to be effective because it's already approaching half an inch in diameter before it ever reaches the target. It punches through heavy clothing, thick winter gear, and bone with impressive consistency. This brings us to a trap many concealed carriers fall into: the snub nose paradox. When you stuff a .357 Magnum into a 2-inch revolver, you sacrifice much of the velocity that made the cartridge special in the first place. You still get the muzzle blast, recoil, and flash, but velocities can drop close to 1,000 feet per second. In many cases, you've paid Magnum prices for performance approaching premium .38 special territory. The .45 ACP tells a different story. Thanks to its large bore diameter and efficient powder burn, it loses very little effectiveness when fired from a short barrel. In compact revolvers, the .45 ACP retains much of its original performance. For snub, nose carry guns, that's a major advantage. Terminal ballistics. When we look at defensive handgun performance in 2026, terminal ballistics tends to divide shooters into two camps. One side believes in velocity, the other believes in mass. The .357 Magnum remains one of the greatest examples of the velocity philosophy. A lightweight jacketed hollow point impacting tissue at over 1,400 feet per second creates a powerful pressure wave. That energy affects tissue beyond the actual wound channel and can produce rapid physiological disruption. The .45 ACP follows a completely different path. It focuses on creating a large permanent crush cavity. It doesn't rely on extreme velocity. Instead, it drives a heavy projectile straight through the target, producing deep and consistent damage. It's a very straightforward mechanism of injury. Consider a worst-case scenario. If a hollow point becomes clogged with heavy clothing and fails to expand, a .357 Magnum may behave much like a fast-moving ice pick. If a .45 ACP hollow point fails to expand, it's still delivering a large diameter projectile with substantial momentum. Too many shooters obsess over kinetic energy figures and spreadsheet comparisons. They look at the Magnum's energy numbers and assume the debate ends there. Real-world defensive encounters are more complicated. Deep penetration from a heavy .45 caliber projectile remains highly effective, especially when barriers or determined attackers are involved. The Magnum may offer a higher ceiling for tissue disruption, but the .45 ACP provides a very dependable floor. Now let's talk about the shooter, because recoil management often determines who can actually use a cartridge effectively. This becomes especially important for older Americans or anyone dealing with hand injuries, arthritis, or reduced grip strength. One of the biggest myths in the firearms world is that defensive guns are supposed to hurt. The .357 Magnum produces a sharp, abrupt recoil impulse. It snaps upward quickly and sends a noticeable shock into the web of your hand. For people dealing with arthritis or carpal tunnel syndrome, full-power Magnum loads can be downright unpleasant. That discomfort often creates anticipation and flinching, which leads directly to slower follow-up shots and reduced accuracy. Keeping the gun flat requires a strong grip and solid technique. The .45 ACP feels completely different. Its low operating pressure creates more of a rolling push than a violent snap. Instead of slamming into your hand, it moves the gun rearward in a smoother arc. I've watched older shooters run box after box of .45 ACP through medium-frame revolvers without complaint. Ask those same shooters to do the same thing with full-house Magnum ammunition, and you'll see ice packs coming out before the day is over. The smoother recoil impulse helps shooters maintain sight tracking and recover faster between shots. In a defensive situation, that matters. Plenty of experienced revolver shooters eventually move to .38 Special, simply to avoid Magnum recoil. A .45 ACP revolver offers another option. You retain major caliber performance while enjoying a recoil impulse that is significantly easier on the body. Let's go one layer deeper and discuss barrel length and powder efficiency. The .357 Magnum is famous for using slower burning powders. To reach its full potential, it really wants a barrel in the 4 to 6 inch range. Fire it from a short carry gun, and a significant portion of that powder burns outside the barrel instead of inside it. That's where the tremendous muzzle blast and fireball come from. You end up absorbing all the disadvantages while sacrificing much of the performance. Chronograph testing in 2026 continues to show that many short-barreled Magnums produce velocities surprisingly close to premium .38 Special plus P loads. You're paying for a lot of extra blast without receiving a proportional increase in effectiveness. The .45 ACP is much more efficient. It uses faster, burning powders and benefits from its larger bore diameter. The powder burns quickly and transfers energy effectively before the bullet exits the muzzle. Even from a 2-inch barrel, a .45 ACP revolver can retain roughly 95% of its potential performance. It simply doesn't suffer the same velocity losses. If your goal is deep concealment or compact carry, the .45 ACP acts like a far more efficient engine. You get the performance you paid for without setting off a flashbang every time you press the trigger. For hunting guns and 6-inch revolvers, the Magnum still shines. But in compact carry revolvers, efficiency clearly favors the .45 ACP. Let's discuss reloads, because staying in the fight matters. The .357 Magnum traditionally relies on speed loaders. They're reliable and proven, but they demand precision. You have to align the cartridges correctly, maintain the proper angle, and operate the release mechanism. Under stress, those fine motor skills start disappearing quickly. Heart rate climbs, vision narrows, and mistakes become more likely. A slight alignment issue can leave cartridges hanging up against the extractor star while precious seconds disappear. Moon clips change the equation dramatically. With enough practice, they represent the fastest revolver reload system available, because the .45 ACP is a short, wide cartridge. The empty space around each chamber creates a natural funneling effect. Shooters can aggressively drive a loaded moon clip toward the cylinder, and the cartridges practically guide themselves into place. That's one reason top competitive revolver shooters often favor .45 caliber wheel guns. For defensive use in 2026, moon clips provide a significant speed advantage. They help revolver shooters keep pace with modern semi-auto reload times. Speed loaders absolutely work, but moon clips remain the benchmark for maximum efficiency. The trade-off is accepting dependence on the clips themselves. We also need to talk about versatility and ammunition availability. After the supply disruptions many shooters experienced leading into 2026, flexibility matters more than ever. This is one area where the .357 Magnum clearly has an advantage. Every .357 Magnum revolver effectively gives you access to 2 different cartridges. You can load heavy hunting rounds for the backcountry, or you can switch to standard pressure .38 Special for practice and urban carry. .38 Special remains one of the best training cartridges ever created. It allows shooters to work on double-action trigger control without developing a flinch, and it generally costs less to shoot. You can train with soft shooting ammunition and carry full power defensive loads when needed. A .45 ACP revolver is much more specialized. While some single-action revolvers offer convertible cylinders for .45 Colt, most defensive double-action models are dedicated to .45 ACP. If ammunition becomes scarce locally, your options are limited. You don't have a lower recoil companion cartridge available. The Magnum platform allows shooters to adjust power levels based on their needs, physical condition, and circumstances. If you injure your hand, You can drop down to 38 Special plus P with a 45 ACP revolver. You're committed to that cartridge every time. Finally, let's talk about the realities of maintaining proficiency. Ammunition cost directly impacts training frequency. Years ago, 45 ACP was viewed as a plentiful and affordable cartridge. The market has changed considerably. Today, 350, 7 Magnum, and 38 Special benefit from enormous production volume because so many revolvers remain in circulation. Manufacturers produce huge quantities of components and ammunition during panic. Buying cycles, 38 Special often stabilizes relatively quickly. 45 ACP remains widely available, but most of its production is geared towards semi-automatic pistols. Finding specialized revolver loads such as heavy hard, cast bullets, or unique seating profiles sometimes requires additional effort. For reloaders, the 350 7 Magnum case is exceptionally user-friendly. The brass tends to last a long time and tolerates repeated loadings very well. Reloading 45 ACP is certainly straightforward, but moon clips introduce another logistical consideration. You need tools to load and unload them efficiently. You need to keep track of them, and you need to inspect them regularly for damage. It's an extra layer of maintenance that Magnum shooters never have to think about. So where does all this leave us? Too many shooters spend endless hours arguing over energy charts and mythical one, shot stops. Some buy the Magnum because they want to carry a lightning bolt. Others choose the 45 ACP because they want a compact wrecking ball. The truth is that modern defensive ammunition has narrowed the gap dramatically. Premium bonded hollow points have elevated both cartridges to the point where either one is fully capable of stopping a threat when used correctly. Both cartridges work. Both have proven themselves repeatedly. The real problem is buying a firearm that doesn't match your abilities. It's the shooter who buys an ultralight Magnum revolver, hates the recoil, and leaves it untouched in a safe for years. It's the shooter who buys a customized 45 ACP wheel gun, and then struggles with reloads because age has reduced hand dexterity. The final decision isn't about chronograph readings or ballistic gel. It's about being honest with yourself. In 2026, the best defensive cartridge is the one that allows you to shoot quickly, accurately, and confidently without developing a flinch. It's the cartridge you can afford to practice with consistently, whether you prefer the blistering velocity of the 357 Magnum or the heavy momentum of the 45 ACP. None of it matters if you can't put rounds where they need to go. Stop chasing ballistic myths. Choose the cartridge that fits your body, your skill level, and your reality. Master the trigger, guarantee your hits, because when everything is on the line, shot placement is the only verdict that counts.